Okay, this class is going to be the first of probably 2 or 3 classes on Flash, and really it's going to cover a lot of basic functions of Flash. To start off with, when you open Flash, you get the same kind of splash screen you get with a lot of the other Adobe applications, where you have create new documents, open recent documents, but they also have some useful templates. Especially if you're doing Flash ads. So I'm going to start off with one of these templates, and we're just going to do a leaderboard. Okay. With the let me open my tools here. I'm just going to move these over here because I think by default it opens up your tools on the right hand side, and I'm just used to them on the left, so I'm just going to move them over here. And the interface is somewhat similar to a lot of the other Adobe apps, but there are some key differences. One of them is the timeline. If you're used to working with After Effects, they've adjusted the timeline a little bit, so it's a little bit more similar to the After Effects timeline, especially now that you have the motion editor, which right now we don't have any motion on the timeline, so it's not showing anything. You have the tools on the left, we have the timeline. Today we're going to go over the motion editor a little bit, and on the right hand side we have properties and library. These are going to be probably the most important parts of starting off with Flash. The property inspector basically gives you information and settings for any kind of object on the timeline or on the stage, and by default, if nothing's selected, it'll give you your Flash properties, or actually give you your document properties. And as you can see here, we have our size of our document, which is 728 pixels by 90 pixels. Flash it's a web-based program, so it's everything's in pixels. If you need to edit this, you just hit the edit button, and then you can edit the size if you need something a little bit different. The frame rate, 24 frames per second, is the default. Basically, the frame rate determines how smooth your animation is. So these are how many frames per second. If you look at your timeline, you see these little white boxes. Those are your individual frames. The lower the frame rate, the smaller your file size is going to be, but also the choppier your animation is going to be. So you can get like a stutter effect throughout your animation if you have too low of a frame rate. Generally 15 frames is the lowest you want to go, and usually even at 15 frames per second it's still a little choppy, so you kind of have to weigh out size versus the smoothness of your animation. I generally stay around 20, and it really kind of depends on what you're working with or what the intent of the animation is. But for this example, we'll use 20. You also have the option to adjust your background color, and for this example we're going to do today, I'm going to use black. So hit OK. So now our stage is black, and your stage is basically your document, the live area of your document. That's where everything happens. The library, right now we don't have any objects in the library. There's nothing in this document, but once we start adding elements, you'll start seeing them show up in the library here. In the timeline, there's also layers. By default, you'll have layer 1, and if you need a new layer, you just click on the new layer button, and it'll create them on top. The topmost layer is going to show up as the topmost object on your stage. It's also important to note that when Flash loads, when a Flash document loads or a Swift document loads in a web browser, it loads from the bottom up. So whatever the bottommost layer is, that's what's going to load first, and then it's going to load these other layers on top.
Does that mean number one would be the last layer?
Number one would be the first layer that it loads.
Okay.
But in your display on your stage, it's going to be on the bottom. So I'll show you an example here. So if I create a blue square on layer 1 and go to layer 2, we'll make a red one. You can see that. You can see that the red square is on top because it's on layer 2. So it displays it. The topmost layer will be on top, but when it actually loads the content, it's going to load the content from the bottom layer first, and then the top layer.
Okay.
And for instance, if we're gonna add scripts or action script to the document, you always want your action script layer to be on top because it's going to load that last, so that basically it loads all the content first and then it loads the script. So that way your script doesn't start animating before the objects load on the screen. So you always want your action script layer to be on top. Okay, I'm going to delete these layers now. And delete them, you just select the layer and hit the trash can the trash can button on the bottom. Okay, I'm not going to go over all these tools right now. Some of them, we have some 3D tools, and we have we have a couple 3D tools that I'm not going to go over right now. We'll do that in another class. We'll probably go over some 3D and video effects. So to start with, I'm going to talk about you have your general selection tool and your sub-selection tool, and that's very similar to Illustrator or Photoshop. It works the same way. Basically, your selection tool will select objects, and then your sub-selection tool will select the nodes or the path of your object. You have a transform, free transform function. One thing to note too, that the keyboard shortcuts for a lot of the tools in Flash are completely different than Photoshop or Illustrator. So if you're used to using some of the shortcuts, might throw you off. You can change it by just going to the edit menu and go to keyboard shortcuts, and then you can map it out however you want. But for instance, like the zoom tool is M for some reason.
Okay.
Yeah. But some of them are similar, like sub-selection tool is A, and that's the same with Photoshop and Illustrator, and the regular selection tool is V, so lasso tool is L. So some of them are similar, but a couple of them are different. That might throw you off. You have a lasso tool used to select objects. I'm going to create an object here on the screen. There's basically two types of shape objects. One is called just a regular shape object, and I'll make one here, show you. I'm going to switch over my property view so you can look at it. And with a shape object, it's when you click on it, you're getting just the shape here. We can use the lasso tool. We can basically select just an area of it. You can see that it's kind of a weird selection there. And I can move that away. One thing about shapes, standard shapes, is that if I make another shape on top, let's see, I'll make a green one, I guess. And I decide, okay, I want that shape. I want to move that shape. It cuts a hole in your other shape below it. But there's another shape you can actually make, which I'm just gonna undo that. Delete that as well. If you click this little button on the bottom here, it creates what's called an object drawing shape. And if I make that, basically it's kind of like a group shape. There is a shape in there. If I double click on it, it'll go into like an isolated view of the shape. You can see it acts just like the shape does.
What was the name of that button?
Drawing object.